We have all had moments in our lives where things just weren't going our way. And maybe it's been a day, a week, a month, or even your year. Someone did it. The Friends theme, I get it. And that's not where we're going with this. But we've all been in those experiences where things just aren't going your way. And last week, if you were a regular attender here, you saw that I got a little vulnerable and I told you guys about some things going on. If you weren't here, let me catch you up. Because the past month, 2 months have been really rough for me and my family. We've had things just been stacking on top of us. Started with some sickness and trying to get over that and healing. And then our air conditioning, right when we got all that heat, our air conditioner decided that it wanted to go down. We're still without AC, which today is not a problem. We're fine. We'll be all right. Just 50 degrees at the top today. We're going to be all right for today. But a cost on top of that we were not expecting, we weren't planning for. We had some even heavier life-altering conversations that were happening. We lost both of our dogs within about 30 minutes of each other a couple weeks ago. And let me tell you, I still haven't had an opportunity to really grieve the loss of them because just yesterday, I spent all morning into the afternoon going over my grandmother's funeral. We buried her yesterday, and that was my last living grandparent. And of course, I don't know if you've ever been to funerals where there's a pastor in the family, and usually they're asked to do a lot of things. Hey, can you do the message? Can you sing? Can you pray? Can you do all these things? And because of that, I had to really put on this face where I feel like I wasn't allowed to grieve the way that I wanted to because I had to perform. I had to sing. And there's many times where I feel like I've had to do that. I've had to put on the face even right here on stage, where these things are going on in my life, but I have a responsibility to lead this congregation in worship. So I come on, I put on the face, and I worship through it. Now, I've learned to be able to do that, and I don't take that for granted, and I love the opportunity that I have, but sometimes it's harder than most. And it's very easy for people to come up to you and say, hey, man, just stay positive. And it's quick for me to sit back and to say, I'll turn to positive as soon as I feel like things are starting to go in my favor and in my direction. Because if we're honest, a lot of us think of peace like this little definition that came up right there. If everything around me settles down, then I'll finally have peace. That if this happens, then I can relax. If my situation improves, if the diagnosis changes, if the bills get paid, if the schedule slows down, if you're a parent, if my kids would just go to bed at the time where we want them to go to bed. Can I hear amen on that one? So, let me tell you one thing I have learned about peace and quiet. If it is peace and quiet and you have children, something drastic is happening. Just not even a few weeks ago, me and my wife are sitting down. My son is at school, and my youngest daughter, Lila, she's doing something, but she's very quiet. And we start to realize, okay, it's too quiet, something's going on. So my wife gets up, she goes to look and say, Lila, where are you? And she's in the hallway. And then my wife gets real quiet. It's like, oh no. So I go up and I see what's going on. Anyone in here ever seen the movie Encanto? There's a character in Encanto, and it's called Casita. It's the house, and the house has its own personality and its own artwork and everything like that. When I come around the corner, my daughter has drawn over the entire wall with marker, Sharpie, everything you could possibly, and I'm not talking about just a little bit, it's all over. And when I come across, she just looks at me with the biggest smile and goes, it's Casita. So I think my wife could see the temperature boiling a little bit because she goes, yeah, Dad, it's Casita. Like, it's okay. So if things get a little quiet, we get a little nervous, right? So if my schedule slows down, if all of these things happen, then I will be at peace. But here's the problem. If your peace is built on things going right, then your peace is always going to be fragile. You're never truly going to have peace because life doesn't stay calm, does it? Life doesn't stay predictable. It doesn't stay easy. So where do we find and where do we keep our peace? Well, if you have never seen me before, first off, my name is Chad. You're going to see something pop up right there that gives me a job title. I don't know which one it is today. Music pastor is what they're calling me. That's a new one. Just today, I've been called 3 different titles. But what I do here is I lead worship and lead you as a congregation. And I want to thank you for that opportunity, first and foremost, because I have grown tremendously with you in this process, in leading worship, just myself. And then I lead this team that is absolutely amazing. Just the fact that I can have today off on that, so that way I can focus on this, and they just take over, and I don't have to correct anything. They come in prepared, they put in the work. So you have a wonderful worship team right now that really puts in effort, so thank them for that. So I started asking this question this week when we're talking about encountering peace. What if peace isn't something you find when life settles down, but what if peace is something you receive when Jesus steps in? Because when we take a look at the life of Jesus, peace doesn't show up when everything is going right. Peace shows up in the middle of storms. It shows up in the middle of suffering. It shows up in the middle of fear. And almost every time it shows up, it's because somebody had faith. So what we're going to do, I'm going to show you what I mean. We're going to go through 3 different stories today, all of where Jesus is talking about peace and examining peace and kind of breaking this down. So we're just going to go through 3 stories, and we're going to start right here, Mark chapter 4. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to it. If not, we have it right here on the screen. Don't feel bad, so we're going to read this together. Here we go. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. So here's what's happening. Jesus and all the disciples decided that they wanted to get on a boat. They're going to a new location. And while they're on this boat, they're traveling. And Jesus is asleep on a cushion while this horrible storm is going on. Now, let me ask you, how tired do you have to be where you can sleep through the middle of a storm? I have a hard time sleeping on a plane or anything like that. So with water hitting him in the face and everything, I'll tell you this real quick story. So when I was about 5 years old, we lived in the Northern Neck, just to give you a little context of who I am and where I come from. So I lived in the Northern Neck, a little town called Lottsburg. And when I was about 5 years old, there were supposed to be these storms that were coming through, and there was going to be a lot of tornadoes. So as a 5-year-old kid, you would imagine, like, I'm hearing the news that there's going to be tornadoes in the area. I'm scared. I'm asking my parents, like, hey, what do we do? Where's the shelter in place? Like, where do we go? And my mom's like, hey, it'll be fine. You're going to stay in your room. Just get some sleep. Well, that night, a tornado did come into our neighborhood and went directly over our house, and I had no clue. I slept through the entire thing, just completely out. Woke up the next morning, I was like, Mom, was there a storm? She goes, yeah, there's a tornado went right over your room. Well, first question is, my parents just left me in there. I mean, and I promise you the storm was bad. We had a yellow lab named Puddin, and Puddin, yes, you heard it right, Puddin. Don't act like you don't name your dogs after your favorite snacks. It's a thing. And yes, I'm from the Northern Neck, so we don't say pudding, we say Puddin. So Puddin, what am I talking about? Puddin got taken out of her kennel. She lived in a kennel down the hill. She got taken out of her kennel, spun around, landed someone else's yard. She's completely fine. Was completely fine. But it was bad enough to where Puddin got removed from her location and moved somewhere else, but not bad enough where the child needed to be moved away from his room into somewhere safer. So I'm not quite sure, but I do know what it's like to sleep through a storm. But when waves are crashing in and stuff is hitting you in the face, that's where I don't think I could sleep through it. So Jesus must have really been going through something here. So then the disciples are sitting there, and they're struggling, and they're pulling, come on, we got it. Just to think of like the perfect storm scenario, and they're trying to get everything straight. Jesus is asleep, and someone's like, well, wake him up. I'm not waking him up. You wake him up. So finally, they get it together, and they go and they say this right here. They go to him. The disciples woke him up and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? So he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. And then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Now, other translations would say, peace, be still. And when he says this, everything goes calm. But the original language of what this would have been written in was Greek. And the Greek word for this was not soft language. A lot of us think that in storms, Jesus speaks calmly. We picture Jesus always being calm. But actually, the Greek word he would have used was siopa. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'll also say pudding. So let's just pretend I'm saying it right today. But he would use the Greek word siopa, which literally means be muzzled. Like if you're putting a muzzle on something that's been out of control. In other words, he isn't asking politely for the storm to calm down. He isn't saying peace, be still. He's saying, storm, be muzzled, be silent, shut up. I know that was a little harsh. I felt it too. Is my son in here today? He would immediately, he does not like that word. He would yell at me, Daddy, don't say that. So I apologize. If you're a homeschool family, my deepest apologies for that. I know we don't say those words around here. But here's why it matters. Here's why this is not some gentle ways. Because Jesus has authority over the storm. When he speaks to authority. And what's interesting is that when he speaks this word, when he uses siopa, this word is used many other times in Scripture when he's talking to demons in other passages. So this word would have been authoritative. This would have been strong. He would have saying, silence, be muzzled, be still. And a lot of people, because of this, would believe that it wasn't just the weather that he was talking to in this moment, but it was the chaos being confronted by the authority of Jesus. And in that moment, the thing that was loud, the thing that was overwhelming, the thing that was out of control became what? It became silent. And I don't know what's been loud in your life lately. Maybe it's fear, anxiety, grief, ongoing questions that just aren't being answered, and they're just getting louder and louder and louder. But the Jesus who took the storm and said, silent, be muzzled, still has the same authority to speak into your situation today. But let's get back to the storm that they're facing right now, this literal storm. Because these weren't just regular guys. Most of these guys were fishermen. They would have been used to being out of the water. They would have been used to storms coming up. But this obviously was something not normal. Because water's filling the boat, the wind's howling, they can't control anything. They're trying to figure it all out. They're trying to pull on a hoist. I don't know if there's a hoist, but they're doing something boaty and trying to fix all of this. Meanwhile, Jesus is asleep. And this part really gets me. I'm going to stay here because it's one thing to feel like God is distant. And you're praying to him and he's distant. But it's another thing that when you know that Jesus is right there and he's just being silent. When he just feels distant. And the disciples, they wake him up and they say, Jesus, do you even care if we die? Have you ever said a prayer like that? God, do you even see this? Do you even see what's going on? Do you even care? Why does it feel like you're not doing anything? And we ask and we wonder and we question. We just want him to wake up and help, to silence. And Jesus stands up, he speaks, and everything goes still. But don't miss this, because he turns to them after this, he turns to them and says this. He says, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? I'm going to stay on that word still for a second. Because think of all the things the disciples would have said and seen up to this point. I'll give you a quick list of some of those things. They would have seen Jesus turn water into wine. They would have seen a curing of a leper. They would have seen the centurion's paralyzed servant be completely healed. Peter's mother-in-law would have been healed. Numerous of demons. They would have seen Jesus do so many miracles that there would have been no doubt who he is and what he can do. That's why they were following him. But even with that, they still had little faith. So we think that peace comes from when the storm stops. But he addresses their faith in that moment because the storm just didn't reveal the weather. It revealed what they truly believed. And if we really believe that the peace comes when the storm stops, then we're wrong. Because Jesus is showing us this, that peace doesn't come from the absence of a storm. It comes from the presence of a Savior. So if peace isn't about the storm stopping, then here's the question, where does it come from? So we're going to jump into our second story of the day. So let's jump into this moment. What's happening here is this is a story that feels very different. The last one was loud. There's wind, waves, panic, and chaos. But this one's very, very quiet. It's very intimate. It's not a storm that you can see. It's not a storm that everyone else notices. It's a kind of struggle that happens over time. It's slow. It's quiet. It's personal. And maybe a lot of us have that. It's not necessarily the big, overwhelming storm. Maybe you're just struggling with something that you don't want anyone to know about. So you carry it quietly inside. And in this story is a woman who had been suffering for over 12 years. 12 years of waking up every day, dealing with the same issue. 12 years of trying to fix it. 12 years of wondering if anything will ever change. And at this point, she's not just physically exhausted, she's emotionally drained. This woman was bleeding for over 12 years. She's emotionally drained, she's spiritually worn out, and probably at a place that probably feels very thin with her hope. But then she hears something. She hears that Jesus is nearby. And instead of giving up, instead of assuming that nothing will change, that this is just my life, she has this small but powerful thought. If I can just get to him. She would have heard of who Jesus was. She would have heard of those miracles. And when she hears that he's coming into town, she just has that thought, if I can just get to him, I can be healed. So this is Mark chapter 5. We're going to read this together. Let's read this. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I could just touch his clothes, I will be healed. 12 years, not a bad week, not a rough month. 12 years of pain, 12 years of trying everything to fix her situation, 12 years of wondering if anything is ever going to change, and not just physically. She would have been isolated. She would have been overlooked, pushed to the margins. Imagine how many times she thought, this is just my life now. I have a bad week, and I think this is just my life now. I'm going to have this cold for the rest of my life. But for 12 years, she experienced this. And according to laws in Leviticus, I want to break this down even more to see what this woman would have been feeling like. And laws in Leviticus would have said this, that she would have been considered, because of her condition, unclean. That means for 12 years, she couldn't go to the temple. She couldn't regularly participate in worship. She would have been avoided by people. As a matter of fact, if she went to somebody and touched somebody, they would have been considered unclean. If she were to go somewhere and sit down at a bench, that bench would have been considered unclean. And there would have been a whole process to then become clean again, not just for her, but for the people she touched, for the places that she sat. They would have all been considered unclean. So for 12 years, not just dealing with pain, but dealing with isolation, rejection, feeling like an outsider. Have you ever had something go on long enough to where you just stopped expecting anything to change? But Jesus is nearby, and she says, if I can just touch him, not even just touch his clothes, if I could just touch him, not get his attention, not go and say the perfect prayer, and once I do this, everything will be better. If I can just touch his clothes. So she reaches, she touches, and immediately after, she's healed. Jesus stops and he turns around and he asks, who touched me? And the disciples are a little worried because the crowd is starting to move in. Everybody's trying to get near Jesus. Plenty of people are touching Jesus as he's walking by, but he stops and he turns and said, who touched me? The disciples even say, Lord, everybody's touching you. How are we supposed to know who touched you? And he asks again, who touched me? And this woman was scared and trembling, and she goes to Jesus and she tells him everything. She said, I was the one that touched you. Think about what this would have looked like. If everyone she touched would have been unclean, as soon as they turn around and they see that it's her, most of the people would have known, and they would have backed off. He said, don't get near me. I don't want to be unclean. Go away. Pharisees would have done the same thing. Get away from me. But what does Jesus say? He says this, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. So it could have been the other way. She could have gone and taken a risk and touched Jesus. Jesus would have been unclean. But instead of Jesus being unclean, she gets healed. And don't miss this order. It says, daughter, your what? Your faith has done what? It has healed you. It has made you well. So now, go in peace, faith to healing to peace. And here's what's wild. There were a lot of people touching Jesus that day, and only one walked away with peace. Why? Because peace doesn't come from being around Jesus. It comes from putting your faith, all of your faith, in him. Some of us aren't in loud storms. Some of us are in quiet ones. Those internal storms where we are struggling with something nobody can see. It brings on anxiety. It brings on fear, exhaustion. And we just keep thinking, if I can fix this, then I'll have peace. But what if peace doesn't come from fixing everything? What if it comes from trusting the one who already knows you and already knows everything that you're going through? And then there's this moment where fear takes over everything. So we're going to go into our third story for the day here. And in this third story, it's really powerful because what happens is the disciples would have seen Jesus be beat beyond recognition of a man. They would have seen him be crucified. They would have seen him die. They would have seen him be buried. And then they would have heard that he is now resurrected. Now, during this time, the Romans refused to admit it. The Pharisees, obviously, they didn't want to admit it. So they're probably running around trying to find out who stole the body, who did these things. And these disciples would have been terrified because, A, they obviously didn't do it. But they're going to be the blame. They're going to be the ones that everyone's going to point the fingers to. It had to be those 12. Well, 11. It had to be them. So they were hunkered down. They were terrified. Here's what it says. It's John right here. It says this. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." They were hiding. The doors are locked. The lights are low. There's a lot of whispering because fear will do that. It'll make you cower. It'll make you shrink back and hide. I don't want to deal with what's coming next. I'm fearful of what may happen, so I'm going to stay right here where it's safe and comfortable. But Jesus shows up. He doesn't knock. He doesn't wait. He just steps into the room, and the first thing he says is this: "Peace be with you." He has been resurrected, and the first thing he says is, "Peace be with you." And a couple verses later, this is what he says. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." He doesn't explain everything. He doesn't fix the situation. He gives them his presence, and then he gives them their purpose. Here is now what you're going to do. And we think peace means no fear, no uncertainty, no questions. We think that once we have peace, all the fear, all the uncertainty, all the questions just disappear. But peace isn't the absence of fear. It is his presence in the middle of all of it. I want to be real with you for a minute. I want to share a little bit more about my story that I've been sharing. Behind me is going to be a picture of my family. And this is a beautiful family. I know the first thing you're looking up when you look at that picture is, that's Chad's wife? How in the world did he bag that one? And let me tell you, a lot of prayers. And then, of course, love begets love. And we had our little boy, Luke. He's 6 years old. And our little girl, Lila. She'll be turning 3 next month. It's scary to think how quick all of this goes. But for this week, this wasn't a message that I was stuttering. This wasn't a message that I was just studying. It is something that me and my family had really lived through. Something as silly as the air conditioning, sickness, something as serious as losing our pets and dealing with all of that. And then yesterday with my grandmother, explaining to my children what this means and how they'll never see her again. But giving them comfort of where she is and the peace we have because of that. But through all of this darkness and everything that was going on, I told you I put on a face mask and that I kept going and I pushed through. But inside and in my quiet time, I said, God, I don't know if I can carry any more of this right now. God, I don't know if you're listening. I don't care if you care, but I need help. And right in the middle of all of this, my wife comes to me and she says, we need to talk. And I know what that means. Something big is coming. And she tells me in that moment that we are expecting our third child. I wish my response was as celebratory as that. So this was not something we were planning for. As a matter of fact, 2026 was supposed to be way different. My wife had plans for her business and what she was going to be doing and how she was going to grow her business and how she was excited to do these certain things and go to CookieCon. You don't know what that means, but it's important to her, so we'll celebrate it. So she's got all these things she wanted to do. I wanted to write new songs. I'm excited about what Atlee Worship is doing, and I'm ready to write songs and put songs out so that we can grow as a congregation and worship to these original things. Just new, unique thoughts. Another worship night, a men's retreat, all of these things that I wanted to be a part of and I wanted to strengthen and grow in. And all of a sudden, it felt like it was taken away. A blessing of what that is, but yet I didn't see it. There were so many conversations between me and my wife that I had to apologize for. In my anger, when we were talking about what are we going to do, how are we going to figure this out, I said, she's like, we just need to pray to God. And I said the line, God didn't have anything to do with this. Shame on me. God had everything to do with this. And I wish I could tell you that my first reaction was like you had. That we gathered around and we sang worship songs and everything was wonderful, but we had questions, we had fear. We said, how is this going to work, God, really, right now? But somewhere in there, I slowed down and my faith stepped back in. Not because everything made sense, not because we figured everything out, but we trust in the one who's in control. And I can honestly tell you, we're at peace. We are excited. Let me tell you, if you've seen me and talked to me in the past couple weeks when I've talked about this new coming child, I've been excited. My mood has changed. Don't think that I live there. But we're at peace not because of our situation. We're at peace because we know who's in control. Because Jesus is present. When we look at these stories, the storm didn't just disappear first. Faith showed up. So what happened was it started with a storm, it moved into faith, and then it moved to peace. With the second story, it was suffering. Then her faith healed her, and she went in peace. With the disciples, it was fear. And then his presence, and then what? Peace. Peace isn't something you find when life finally settles down. Peace is something you receive when you trust in the ones who stand in the middle of it. And Jesus says it this way: the peace I leave with you, and my peace I give. I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. So here's what I want us to do. I don't think that this was a message that we should just sit back and listen to. I think this is a moment where we should respond. Because some of you walked in right now and your storm is very loud. It's very obvious. It's very present. Some of you walked in and you were just holding inside. You're smiling, but inside you're dying. Some of you walked in with fear of what's happening next. And maybe today God didn't bring you here just to fix everything instantly. maybe he brought you here to remind you that he is still here with you. So as we listen to this song, I want this to be your prayer. I want this to be your response. Let this be the moment where your faith rises again and peace follows.